Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today attended Southern Methodist University and Boston University, and his law degree is from SMU School of Law. He has written 3 novels and also writes book reviews and essays that appear in online publications. Before retiring, he practiced law for 35 years at 3 multinational law firms. He grew up as an oil company brat and lived in Latin America, Texas, and New York. Today, he is a writer who lives in Baja California, Mexico, with his wife, Nancy, and their 2 dogs, Finn and Cooper. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Mark Zvonkovic.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Our opening question, Mark, although I can tell from your resume the answer, what took you so long to write your first book?
Right. Well, it's not hard to answer that question. I had this pesky law career, and it got in the way of doing just about anything else. I had, as most people who work with law firms would know, I spent hours and hours a day working, and it included weekends. Got even worse after the internet came around and email. Before then, it was great. You had to go to the office to work. That meant I had to go down to the office on Saturdays and Sundays, but nevertheless. But then after that, suddenly it became 24/7. And that was where it was the last couple of decades of my career. And I'm glad it's behind me now.
Well, Mark, once you wrote your first book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to use a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I actually self-published the first book and then republished it later with a publisher. But the first book was really sort of a put my toe in the water. I was thinking that I really needed to do something else when I ended my career. Writing was always something that I had wanted to do. In fact, when I went to law school, I thought of myself as selling out to the establishment. Remember, this was in the early 70s, because rather than to pursue something that would have included a writing career, like a doctorate in literature, I became a lawyer, in which case I pushed everything aside. So it was logical. It was like the guy who's always wanted to be a great golfer, and he gets towards the end of his career and he thinks, I'm going to play golf all the time, for example. I mean, there are lots of other examples, but that's a pretty universal one. So I thought I'd put my toe in the water. So I started getting up at like 5 a.m. And for the couple of hours before I then set off, we lived in New York City at the time, and I would walk to work. It was about 1.5 miles. I would write, and then while I was walking to work through Central Park, I would think about what I had written and so forth. So it really was a kind of a trial run. And I liked it so much that I even retired early. I could have, continued to practice for probably another 5 years, but back then, I didn't have time to go look for an agent or to look for a publisher or anything like that. And again, it was like a hobby. So I self-published it with a company that did it, but that's what I did. So that when I then did retire a couple of years later, I basically was able to hit the ground running.
Well, you've been quite prolific with your writing since then. Tell us more about your series.
Yes, it's called, and again, this is more of the marketing people than me, but it's referred to as the Raymond Hatcher stories. They, I got a little bit testy with them when they said it's a series, and I said, well, it's really just characters that flow over between the stories, and so we sort of agreed on stories, but it was it's about the characters as opposed to a particular plot. Usually in a series, especially if they're spy novels or if there are mysteries or things like that, it's an ongoing plot. You have a person, and from one to the next, the same, like Inspector Gamache, for example, in in that whole series, just continues. So you can go on for 20 books with, one story after the other that's basically based on the character, but sort of the same type of story as before. My books are not so driven by the plot as they are driven by the characters. And I like to say that I spend a lot of time creating these characters. And it becomes almost like you meet someone new and then you become friends with them. And then as you get to know them better, you ask more questions about them. You find out more things. Well, that's been the case with me. Raymond Hatcher, is the namesake of the Raymond Hatcher stories, was a character who, it was just totally somebody I created. It had been based on a lot of novels I had read, that, like John le Carré and some others, where there was a character who I found very interesting. And so Raymond was that. And I started with, when he was born in 1925, and as a very young person, graduated and joined what was then called the OSS, which was the precursor of the CIA. And from there, while the background plot has to do with his next 50 years, this is A Lion in the Grass, his next 50 years going from the OSS to the CIA and so forth, it really is about his growth as a person and the things that happened to him and the effect that those things had on his life. So that's basically what the Raymond Hatcher stories is about. Raymond Hatcher is only nominally in the other two, but there are other characters who he interacts with, who then in the subsequent novels get explored deeply.
So these are standalone books that involve some of the same characters.
That's correct.
Did real people inspire any of these characters?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Of course, there is no character that reflects any real person, but a character, at least the way that I develop them, is a whole mishmash of all kinds of different people. Some of them are real people, of course, and that I've met and got to know during. Many of them are lawyers, of course, in that respect. But a lot of them are also characters in other fiction. They're characters who I really connected with. They would be from someone like Graham Greene or someone of that ilk. So that I got to know a little bit about the spy world through reading those. And so to the extent that the life had to do with that. And of course, Belinda, which is the last one, has to do with lawyers. Well, I spent 35 years with lawyers. So yeah, there's no real one person who has inspired them at all. There are plenty of historical characters in A Lion in the Grass who appear again, um, or appear in actual name of who they were, obviously. But other than that, it's really sort of something that comes out of a creative muddle between all the people I've met and the people I read about.
How do you determine the plot of your books?
It's really rather simple. I've got the characters in my mind. I've gotten to know them. I want to explore things about them, and so the plot I make up to do that. The plot is really about having the characters interact so that the reader can get to know the character better. Other than that, probably the emphasis on plot is not very strong in my writing. I'd like to think that it's good and people are stimulated by it, but it's certainly, if there's a weak point, it might be that there's more character than plot. And I say weak point in terms of it being commercial fiction. Obviously, it's not a shoot 'em up, there's action on every page type of thing.
So it's more about the character arc.
Yes, it is. Oh, definitely. That's a good way to say it.
Can you describe your editing process that you chose for each of the books?
Sure. I had an editor on all of them, obviously, and several editors. But on the first one, of course, which was the self-published one, I did have my own editor who went through that, and I was sort of a newbie at that point, so I wasn't sure. But I did that for sure. Then from there, I still hire my own editors. So on Belinda, I actually worked with an editor who did developmental work and then line editing, and then I also got a specific editor to go through and check for grammar and all consistency and all those things. So that was the more of a publisher's editor, but the developmental editor, my publishers are small, so it's not like they are going to spend a lot of money on that. So I did, because I really wanted it to be good writing. So that's how I've done it, and they've been different each time, and probably for the fourth novel, it may be a different editor again. I think it's good to keep mixing things up.
Well, it really is. And even if I have 4 editors on a book, they all find different things and they all discuss different things with me. So sometimes you can get hooked on the editing process.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the book that you're going to read from today? Set up a scene and then read a few paragraphs so that we can hear your tone and voice.
Okay, sure. The book is The Narrows, which is, out of the 3 books, what interests me. And it was actually the first book, but then was redone, rewritten almost, and then republished a few years ago. But it's the only book that's in the first person. It's written from the first person point of view, not the third person point of view, which the other 2 are. So everything that you hear in the book, and this is why I'm going to read from it today, because I sort of like, because it comes through just the character's eyes. And I got very much like this character, and I keep thinking about him all the time and so forth and so on. So I'll just give you a hint. He's going to appear again at some point. But anyway, his name was Larry Brown. And this takes place in the 70s. It was during a time of social upheaval. I went to that. We belonged to this Adirondacks club in the summers, and I went to, and they had their big party was called the Summer of Love, which was, if for all of those old enough to remember the Summer of Love, was but it was an indication of the upheaval that was going on. And so during that time, you found a lot of people who were very well off and were going to Ivy League schools and so forth and so on, who really got sort of caught up in the whole, exploration of the self. And some of them joined cults. And so this is the historical aspect of this novel. The main character's cousin joins a cult on Cape Cod. And what happened was that a real person, as it was based on a real person, was hired to go and kidnap that character's name was Bradley, kidnap Bradley back and deprogram him. It was so there are a bunch of actual things that happened with that, and the kidnapper was prosecuted on a number of cases, spent time in jail, and so forth. So that is what the plot was. But it was really about Larry, who is the main character, who's a 7th grade teacher, comes from a family where his father and mother were both professors. And he's not sure what to do with himself either. I mean, he has he's young, he's in his 20s. But he learns during the course of this kidnapping episode and some other things, something about himself. So this is just a couple of paragraphs of Larry about midway through the novel, making an observation. I didn't expect to sleep after I came home, but I did. Soon after I got in bed, where I had expected to stare at the ceiling and replay Millie's nakedness in the parking lot, the rain began, a hard driving rain that beat against the windows. And then I slept, although not before I had one bittersweet moment of contentment from the thought that somewhere along the road to Rockport, Bevins had pulled over and was frantically trying to put the top up. For me, rain can be simultaneously soothing and traumatic, if that is possible. The soothing part is best depicted in memories of the warmth of my small room at the Narrows on those cold summer mornings when I would stay in bed to listen to the rain pound the roof and the ocean rush through the channel that is just outside my window. The trauma occurred when I got out of it, and the world suddenly seemed dim, and my body was a shadow slinking through a heavy shade cast upon the hallway outside my door. I would clutch the rail along the stairs as I made my way down to the living room into a dim daylight seeping through the windows. There, my shadow became detached from my body, where it would lurk behind me until the sun came out. The shadows of an overcast day were not my friend. So that is, again, you can hear sort of the late adolescence in his feelings about things and what's happening. I mean, the thing with Millie and is that it was his girlfriend who then has hooked up with another guy who's going to Rockport. She's going to Rockport with. But it is something that is doing that in his life.
I love that line about he was thinking of her having to put up the top of the car, getting caught in the rain. I know all of us who've had convertibles before have experienced that.
Right. And it was his way of wishing ill upon them, of course, in a way, without saying that that's what it was, but that's what it was.
Very subtle and nice. I love first person. I don't write in first person. I write in third, but I always get so sucked into first person writing.
Yes. Larry McMurtry thought it was very difficult. But many of his novels, his early novels, he wrote in first person and then went back and changed them to third person.
Mm.
So he's very interesting. He's written a lot of essays about things like that. He's quite an interesting writer. And being from Texas, of course, I quite like him as well.
Mark, how long on average does it take you to write a book?
Well, there's not an answer to that, because that first book, of course, writing for a couple of hours early in the morning every day took a long time. And I don't even remember how long. But this last one, Belinda, took almost 3 years. A Lion in the Grass, which I wrote right after I retired, only took 2 years. So it's a question of what else is going on in my life at the time. And also with Belinda, I was much more intent about writing a better book. So, I spent 2 years with that editor, going back and forth and back and forth. And the book was rewritten numerous times. And it was at one point was twice as long as it turned out to be. All of that, hit the floor, the cutting room floor, so to speak. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on, which takes longer. I think probably that the next book will take less time.
Well, I'm always interested in what you edit out of the book. What did hit the cutting room floor?
Oh, well, for those who have read Belinda, there were characters, there were explorations of characters. Belinda herself, for example, there were probably 20 pages about her early life, what she was like as a girl and what her ancestors were like, who came from South Texas, and some of those types of things, and a boyfriend that she had. None of that's in there anymore. There's just there's some references to, her mother talking about her having colt's legs and her riding a bicycle very fast and so forth, but nothing of any of that deep dive. So that's one thing. Then the character Anna, who is the young woman spy who meets up with Jay. There's a whole thing in there about her grandmother, Vera. Vera also appeared a little bit in A Lion in the Grass, but there was a great deal more about her written in Belinda, and it got jettisoned too. I mean, these are probably for marketability reasons. I mean, they distract from just sitting down and reading the story. So there was there were passages about Vera also that got deleted. And there were a couple of other instances like that.
Well, even the big five or four, whichever they are now, require all of their authors to do most of their own publicity. And that's a challenge to those of us who just like to sit and write. Have you found anything as far as publicity that worked, or maybe even that didn't work?
Yes, and my first experience with real publicity came with with Belinda also. Belinda was picked up by a small publishing company that's run by a former lawyer as well, who also is a friend, and he really decided to spend a little money on Belinda, and which was helpful. So they hired a company in Austin, a publicity company that's wonderful, and they PR by the book is the name of it, and they're had a wonderful the owner and the head of that company is a wonderful woman, She's in Austin, and the publicity manager who I had was absolutely spectacular. So that was basically 3 months, and it was hard work. It was a lot of doing things like doing interviews, doing other podcasts, writing small things. I wrote a couple of essays that were published in a couple of newspapers that were about the writing process. And one was in the Union Tribune in San Diego. And so it was quite a bit of work, and it was amazing to see all the contacts that she made and put me in touch with. Probably it was probably more hands-on, but not as deep as the big four or the big five, whichever it turns out to be, would do. But I don't know about them. So, but that's what I understand. The problem, I think, with the big four or the big five is that they test the waters, they publish the book, and then if they don't have this immediate amount of sales, then they ignore you.
Yeah.
You probably haven't heard about that.
Yes. I have heard about that. I haven't experienced it personally, but I have heard many times about that. What do you think was the best money you've ever spent as a writer?
Oh, that's with the development editing. That was my own money, and I'd spend it again. It was so worth it. I look at it a little bit like going to or hiring a psychotherapist and spending years paying a psychotherapist to basically talk to. The development editing was somewhat like that in a way, only instead of it was more geared toward my characters and my writing than it was obviously toward my own little personal life, but they're all connected. Your personal life and your writing is connected for sure. If it's not, then the stuff you're writing is boring. Yeah.
Mark, what are you working on now? Do you have another book underway?
Yes, actually, I'm looking at writing 2 books. I'm going to try writing 2 books at the same time, just because this is an interest of mine with respect to publishing also. I learned a lot about publishing during this last process and have done a lot of research. And so I'm going to write, and I look at more of my works as literary fiction as opposed to just commercial fiction. And I'm going to write another piece of literary fiction that's going to involve the passage I read from Larry, which occurred in the 70s. A lot's happened to him since then. I'm not sure I can tell you exactly everything that's happened yet, but I know a lot's happened, and I've been thinking about all the things that have happened since 1972 and 2022. So I'm going to pick him up in 2022 and go back through what's happened to him. So that's what the literary fiction is going to be. And then I'm going to try to write just a straight, if I can do it, because I've tried before and haven't been able to, just a straight mystery. That's more commercial fiction. It's not going to have any deep dives into any characters. It's going to, all be about a set of events that happens.
Well, that's so popular now. Everybody's into true crime and mysteries and thrillers, so that should go over well. I'm anxious to hear about how writing 2 books at one time will come out. That's quite ambitious.
Yes, I suspect one will get put in front of the other a lot more than not, but I think that's right.
Well, you've certainly got a beautiful place to write in Baja, and so I'm sure you can be inspired there very easily.
Yes, it's easy to go sit by the ocean and get inspired.
Well, Mark, Always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are a unique set. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Yes, and much older than 50 even. Um, some people, I think, look at it. I looked at it as the way that I passed into a different stage of life. So I went from having a career, which I think most writers over 50 have had another career before that, into something else. And you can look at that in a number of ways. You can look at it as a hobby, or you could look at it as a second career. Or in my case, just doing something that I love that comes back to me. In any of those cases, I think, though, it's important for a writer over 50 to realize that the world is going to receive what he does differently, he or she does differently. And one can't necessarily, or if one strives, it's going to be a very difficult job to suddenly become a John Grisham or somebody like that. All of those people started off much younger than 50. And many of the very popular writers nowadays are less than 50, much younger than 50, and so forth. But someone like me doesn't have the sensibility that the younger people have, or, the long history of dealing with publishing commercial fiction. So you have to set your goals. If your goal is, to become rich and famous, you might want to rethink that, or set yourself up for, unhappiness at not achieving it, because it's a near impossible goal, I think. The goal needs to be to produce something that really you believe has artistic merit, and that will give a reader something that's special. Now, having said all that, there are so many other things you have to do, but you like, for example, hire an editor, do all of the things that maybe a young person writing, especially who gets picked up by one of the big four, isn't going to do, because it's all going to be done for them. And it's important to realize that that's part of what you're doing. It's all part of the exercise. And you have to modify your expectations on that regard. If you don't like it and it's a job that you're getting bored with, like you did your last career, maybe you had to find something else to do. But that's basically my advice.
Well, I think that's great advice. And all of us over the age of 50, far over for some of us, have many more careers in us, and we can pick and choose and live in what I call life's sweetest third, and
Yes.
enjoy, and also leave a legacy for those who come behind us, because we have the wisdom of hindsight. So I just appreciate you so much being with us all the way from Mexico today. And we're excited to say that you're now one of our authors over 50.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.